Truth-driven thinking number 88. Is the education crisis real? And if so, what is it?
Knowledge is the difference between love and mass murder. You can't do anything unless you get a look further. Knowledge is the difference between love and mass murder. You can't do anything unless you get a look further.
Welcome back once again to Truth-Driven Thinking, where we challenge emotion-driven thinking and overly simple conventional wisdom. I'm Stephen Gibson, a still reforming emotion-driven thinker, and I'm glad that you're here. In fact, you may recall I cannot do it without your help, so please don't forget to support us with your membership and participation at the new Truth.Bloomfire social learning community, where we'll take a deeper look at some of the issues we explore here in our baby steps toward ever-elusive truth, which we always say we don't have, but we're searching for it, trying to figure out how the world really works so that we can improve it sensibly. And today we are talking about education. So is there a crisis in public education? And if so, is it real? Could it be partly manufactured for political gain? And what is the nature of the problem and the solution if there is a crisis? In other words, how do we make public education better, whether we use the word crisis or not? Assuming that you want public education, which might be a question you have. So how can we make things better, get more productivity per dollar, however you want to look at what better means to you, and give kids, this really is always we remind ourselves about kids, the greatest possible chances at success, whatever success means. So you can see already quite a few variables in this equation. So all that said, and many would also say, and how can we kind of uphold what the Founding Fathers envisioned when they decided that all kids in America ought to be educated. So setting aside the politicians and policy wonks for the moment, what would a balanced group of street-level veteran teachers and administrators do if someone died and put them in charge and maybe they had an adult beverage and got together to discuss these things amongst themselves? And it so happens that we've assembled a group a little bit like that today for a bit of a free-form roundtable discussion on truth-seeking in education reform. And what I'd like to do at this point is welcome Mr. Matt Miller, Ron Fuller, and Tom Novak to the program. These are some local, I'm going to let you introduce yourselves, but I consider them all friends. We all come from very different backgrounds, and we'll get into that in a second, which is why I thought one day when we were exploring these issues in an informal setting, I thought, maybe the world would be a little better if people could get together and have these conversations informally once in a while. And who knows, maybe as Ed Deming used to say, the solutions come when you go to the people closest to the problem, the people in the trenches on the front line. And I think we've all been there. You've all been there. I'll disclose that I just retired from 10 years as a board member of my local Board of Education, and we all have some ties to that. But so let's start with Mr. Miller and give us a little bit about your background, if you would, Matt.
Well, I'm currently the superintendent at Parchment School District, starting my 5th year, 11th year as a superintendent, local school superintendent. I was an athletic director, I was a principal, so I've run the gamut of school positions. I come from a lower middle class, blue collar family, raised pretty conservatively, and my thoughts have changed over time, certainly, and where we are educationally right now, just a quick bias of mine. One, I think we're in a very good place in many ways. I think we educate kids very well. One of the issues we have in the state of Michigan, I believe, is we're trying to put all kids on a college prep track, and I think that's wrong. I think we label far too many children as failing when they are not. They have some great talents, we ignore them. That's not good for students, it's not good for families, it's not good for our kids' future. So that's a little bias I have going in.
So the focus on reading, writing, and arithmetic, is that what you mean by
The focus is too narrow.
Okay. All right. All right, very good. We'll continue with the introductions with Mr. Ron Fuller.
Well, I started my career in education in 1974, so that makes me the old guy. Became an administrator in 1979, went from dean of students, went to an assistant principal, athletic director, principal, assistant superintendent, and now I'm superintendent of Kalamazoo County's Regional Educational Service Agency. And I'd like to respond real quickly to your opening to do we have a crisis in education, and I would like to broaden that and say, do we have a crisis in American society? And my answer to that is absolutely. And if you truly believe that your public schools are a microcosm of society, then yeah, we do have a crisis in American schools, but not one that necessarily educators can solve. Because I truly believe in the adage that it takes a village to raise a child. And with, what's happening in American society, the disengagement, as we start to take a look at what's happened to the good-paying jobs. Technology has taken many of the good-paying jobs, but an awful lot of those jobs have gone overseas. We've made it very, very convenient for people to become wealthy, and we're all part of it. We all invest in the market. We all want returns. We want performance. So, we're partially to blame with outsourcing and overseeing of jobs to other countries. But the bottom line is if you believe that public schools are a microcosm of society, there is a crisis. Now, I agree with Matt. I think we're doing a much better job of educating children, nowhere near as good as it can be, but we'll get further into the manufactured crisis because I think I have a really bias that there is a point that's being attempted, and it's scary because they may succeed.
All right. We will certainly come back to that. That's a lot in that opening statement, and so you've thrown it out there and said we have a societal crisis that education may or may not, you're saying may not be able to fix. Mr. Tom Novak, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Tom Novak, a sixth grade teacher at Parchment Middle School. Been in the district there for 20 years. Also have been the Education Association president, chief negotiator. Also the MABA, which is a countywide organization, president as well. So I come to it with a little bit of knowledge with the collective bargaining stuff that you have to do at the local level as well. I agree with both Mr. Miller and Mr. Fuller that we have kids that are being successful, but we're measuring them under a standard that is not even realistic. 100%. I mean, under No Child Left Behind, that's just unrealistic. I'd like to see more vocab, and I think maybe that's what Matt was alluding to, but we've had to make cuts to certain things to try to reach this unrealistic goal, but no one wants to call it that because I think sometimes we're afraid that can be used as an excuse. But I know, because I'm dealing with kids, and I can tell you that there's going to be a certain percentage that will not make it on to college. So the college prep line, we need to do something for those other kids that aren't necessarily going to go on to college.
Let me follow up with you a little bit on that point, because we're all pretty familiar with the context right now of this debate. And it goes something like this. There's no money. Michigan's in a particularly rough situation. We'd been running what we call structural deficit. Kicking the can down the road is the phrase we hear a lot about for a decade. We knew, and forget the particularities of Michigan's funding mechanism. This is common in other states. Revenues gone south. So we kind of have the conservatives saying, shrink government, we got to get government the hell out of this. Vouchers are a great option. Charter schools are a great option. We need to reduce the tax burden so that we can get innovative businesses to invest in jobs in our state. We can grow the economy. To some degree, the boat will rise. The boats will all rise with the rising tide. I don't want to get into too much economics here, but we debate this in some of our other programs. We've had a number of economists on, and Some completely dismiss that theory, and some love that theory. But tell me a little bit about, for instance, as it relates to teacher merit pay. Some say, well, Tom, you might do a little bit better with Susie if you had some incentive or some motivating factors, but yet you were telling me recently that sometimes the things that Susie and Susie's parents say, what culturally roadblocks do you run into that you've expressed not being able to overcome?
Well, I think going back to Mr. Fuller, there's a problem in society right now where those who are doing well, and we're seeing such a disparity between the economic top and the bottom kids. But the kids are coming to school with less than they have before, at least over the time that I've been doing it, and the parents are struggling economically for to be able to support themselves and or their family. So that brings a whole another issue that schools have to deal with that a lot of times gets overlooked. But that's a societal problem. We don't want to address, in my opinion, a lot of what causes that.
And I know none of this is kind of politically correct to say, but do you feel, I'm going to ask you a tough question. Do you feel like there are kids that, I know you don't give up on kids,
right? But
do you feel like there are kids that are going to be an extraordinary challenge?
Oh, absolutely. But it has to be addressed in the bigger picture in order for them to all be successful. I'm talking about preschool. We were talking about that for 15 years now. It's finally maybe coming, and these guys would know better than me, but why not make that part of an everyday existence for some of these kids? And I used to, run the prep program for 4-year-olds where you did home visits and you did all these things, but I don't know how realistic. I don't know what the cost is. These guys would be able to give you that information better than me, but I would certainly think one of the issues would be an all-day kindergarten that we're finally talking about, but even preschool. I mean, once we can get some of those kids out of that home environment, because it's not consistent with a good learning environment. Some kids don't get read to until they show up in kindergarten, but we don't want to mention that. But we want to say that we're going to have them under all these new plans coming out of the government, all ready for college 100%, which is, to me, just ridiculous.
Some of you have seen the comparisons when people say we ought to run the schools like a business. Some of you have seen the comparisons, some great essays we've all read where they say, well, that's great, except in a business, if my vendor gives me defective product, and no, we're not calling kids defective, but we're getting a broader input into public education than ever before. Is that a fair statement or not? The kids more prepared when they walk in those doors the first time on the high end, and kids that are...
I believe the spectrum, ask any kindergarten teacher in the land, that the spectrum is growing between the kid coming in that has had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity. What about the kindergartner whose school lets out? In the summer, they're enrolled in camps, they're enrolled in lessons, they're taking music classes, and the other kid who's out on the street and is watching TV. And those same two kids are coming back to first grade. This kid has made zero. If anything, they're probably regressing. Mm-hmm. And you have the child over here that's growing exponentially because their parents are taking the time with it. And that is a socioeconomic factor in many cases.
The breakdown of the family is a price that we're paying as a nation, I believe, and certainly we see it played out here. The family unit, when it's whole, and how you can define that however you like, but a healthy family environment, which could mean many things, and I won't go into that, but if you have a family where the parents read to their children, do arts and crafts with their child, help with all those motor skills, social skills that change their level and abilities when they hit K-12. That's what we don't have as much as we once did. I'm not near as old as Mr. Fuller and probably never will be, but...
That was an earlier discussion.
But that said, things are different than they were when I was, 40 years ago when I hit kindergarten. So we are seeing children who don't know letters, words. They don't know how to tie their shoe. They've not held crayons. They've not held scissors. They don't know how to use scissors. And we also have children, which was already mentioned, that come to school already reading, have been to camp after camp, are fluent in piano or whatever. They've had numerous opportunities because of the family unit and the ability that the family has to create those opportunities for that child. Back to Tom's point, you're not going to have a parallel path for those kids to have the same successes throughout schooling. It's not going to happen. Does it mean they're not going to be successful? It doesn't need to mean that. And what is success? That's another difficult thing. You also mentioned the whole merit pay issue. Merit pay is a happy thought, in my opinion. Tom may work, he does. Tom's a relationship guy. That's a strength for Tom. So as a teacher, how do we measure how good a relationship he has with kids? You can't. It's impossible. That's part of the art. It's part of caring. It's part of respect. You can't measure that. Yet, what he does interacting with a middle school student could be the difference between that child staying in school or dropping out. How do you measure that? It's not as simple as the, if you will, business model where you put out a product and we measure equally what their aptitude is. In what? On what? The ACT? Is that the end all? You can talk about the whole college readiness thing, and many would debate it's a coin flip. It's a coin flip as to whether or not that student who's college ready based on the ACT will be successful in college or not.
Well, somewhere behind you is a book by Ruby Payne that you've given me, and I'm not horribly familiar with her work, but I understand we've just had some recent guests, Tom Clark from the Center of Naturalism, who talks about cause and effect in the natural world, and that we love to think Bill Gates is a self-made person. And this entire notion that we all do it as if magically as a demigod in and of and by ourselves. We just decided somehow to escape our conditions, our environment, our biology, our genetics, our illnesses physically. So with that background, and I will tip my hand that it seems to me that Ruby Payne and others suggest that the biggest predictor of academic performance are those inputs. Now
have you ever heard of the book The Outliers?
I wrote a piece about it, yes.
Okay. If you read that book, that's a life-changing book for any father, any educator.
Agreed.
You know, I used to serve as Parchment superintendent many years before Matt. I know Tom's teaching. He's an outlier. I was an outlier when I taught with kids. So was Matt. Okay? You know, as a principal, we were outliers. I had kids who were going to commit suicide, who came to your office, and you were able to intervene and bring resources and bring the parents in, and the kid ended up graduating and hopefully going on to a successful society. But again, we are demanding of public ed, because the public's paying for it, that every child is going to be successful. That's the same thing as demanding every doctor heals every patient. Every lawyer gets every person off. Every social worker cures every ills. Every psychologist. It's not going to happen. It's an imperfect product.
Do we drain resources that would be allocated to making better doctors by, because I hear that a lot, that the perception is, and I'm going to use language, I get asked these questions. Mm-hmm. We're spending too much time on the low end and taking resources away from the kids who want to be there.
Depends on if you're on the low end or not. You know, it all depends on where you sit on the spectrum. It's very easy for the upper middle class or the upper class socioeconomically to make those statements. And you and I have had many, many discussions, and many of those people grew up in a privileged household and, in fact, joined daddy's firm or inherited the business. A lot of now this isn't going to be real pleasant to some of my friends, But the bottom line is, I came from the same background Matt did. I sounds like lower middle class, okay? And I was the first one in my family to go to college because my father told me I was going to college from day one, because he didn't.
Right.
But the bottom line is it's pretty simple. If you grow, I didn't have a business to go to.
Sure.
His dad was a salesman.
Sure.
So I had to pick my own route.
Yeah.
And I picked my route because I found out I enjoyed working with kids.
And again, yet you were equipped, and I'll use the word blessed, with that ethic, that cultural background. You had enough. It might not have been great, but or I don't want to put words in your mouth, but so in other words, we had at least enough advantages to give you the knowledge, the genetics, the environment, to pursue and do the things that you've done.
The expectation.
And the expectation.
From the day
sure.
I could understand my dad, I was going to go to college. I didn't know what college was, but you're going to go. And, you don't miss work. You get up and go to work every day. We all came from that.
Yeah, no, this makes me...
Yeah.
So what do we do? What do we do with the third or fifth or half of our districts, in some districts, where the culture of poverty, again, this is Ruby Payne's term, suggests that education is actually an insult to the family?
Well, you're going to have to throw all kinds of resources if you truly, truly believe that all kids can achieve. We know all kids can learn, but there will be societal influences that choose not to. Gangs. Right now we're marching towards a huge division, and this side over here is going to be thrown away. Absolutely. So that we have more resources for this side. And that's what's behind the voucher plan.
Okay.
That flat out is a segregation of society on socioeconomic levels.
So let's go down that road. You've probably heard me. I know two of you have heard me say this. I belong to a group of business owners, largely Republican, conservative fiscally, which is where I came from. And recently they got me riled up in a group saying, well, the local Catholic school produces a 24 average ACT, which is wonderful. The solution is vouchers. Just let all the other kids
I can
go
win.
to the...
I can be the best coach on the block if you let me recruit my kids. You agree?
I could be. I don't know if you could.
Okay, all right. But the bottom line is it's Julie Mack wrote something, and I read it just the other day, alluding to this. The Christian schools and the Catholic schools and the private schools talking about their SAT or the ACT scores or college-ready scores. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay? When I have all of my people motivated, and trust me, if I'm sending my child to a private school, whether it be parochial or not, I'm motivated because I'm already paying my tax dollars in to support the public school system.
A selection bias.
Right. Now I'm paying above and beyond that, and I totally understand why that parent's ticked. I get it. Okay? But when you look at the founding fathers, in their wisdom set up, or people who followed the founding fathers set up the public school system so that all children would have a chance. And, we're all products of it. I don't know. Did you go to a private school?
No.
We're all, and was I college ready? Nope. Were you college ready?
Yes.
So the case on the vouchers is...
I had great teachers.
I did too, but I struggled.
Put them in our school, and we get only the best of the best, and the motivated parents, and from the culture with some money, and the culture with some resources and active involvement in the kids' lives, and we should be doing 28s. Forget the 24 that they're doing on the ACT.
Well, if you strip out and you go socioeconomic, like Julie did, you're going to see that the kids from the higher socioeconomic level in the public schools do as well or better than the parochial or private schools.
So why not? So if we believe in it, and a lot of us have come from a very laissez-faire free market as being the optimal, the markets will flow resources where they need to go. So these kids will all start going to Hackett Catholic, which is the name of the local Catholic school. You're suggesting that what happens when this game plays out? Why won't vouchers work long term?
Vouchers will not work because you're going to end up throwing away this segment over here. And, it's just like in a team coaching environment. If you were coaching a football or a basketball team, you really work hard on the weakest link because it's the success of the team. And if you want to segregate society, and I'm not talking racial, even though that will be the result.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay? But if you segregate society based on socioeconomics and I get the group that wants to do that. I kind of get their side.
Well,
I want my tax dollars to go to where my child's going to be educated because I am choosing to take them to the private school.
And you almost made the case for it, which is you automatically spend some time on the lower end. I'm back to that point. So if I want the best possible opportunity for my kid, isn't he better off going to this private school?
All kids are.
I like trying to goad him into these answers.
But what we're going to do is we're going to put the kids who are disenfranchised, in other words, they have no one to advocate for them, and the special needs children over here.
Right.
Which they can turn down as well.
Right. In this inferior school system, because we're not going to fund it.
Okay, what Tom just said, elaborate on that. They can turn them down. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, well, any of those, my limited understanding of a private school or one of these schools is if they look at any maybe what they would consider a deficiency, they don't have to accept my application. They don't have to.
They're not going to take our autistically impaired kids.
Well, if they start taking state monies, that will be an interesting battle.
But charters have somewhat avoided that in that their answer, my understanding is, I'm not there, so I can't say firsthand, but my understanding is they simply say, we don't have services for that.
Right.
So if you want services, don't come here. So it's frustrating because, one, I don't think you're necessarily, in fact, I disagree that you will get a better education by going to a private or parochial school. I think you're going to get whatever education the child and the family chooses to put into it. So if you choose to go to Parchment public schools, I believe you're going to get a great education if that's what you want, and you're motivated to make that happen.
And you're supported in that.
How many doctors has Parchment put out? Astronaut. Not necessarily that's the end all, but in my opinion, a bricklayer or a welder. That's a very successful student as well.
It's there if you want to take it, if you're culturally supported to take it.
It is there for the taking in almost every public school. Now, one issue we haven't touched on, and I know you'll bring it up later, but one of the issues is everyone wants to put public education in a box and say, because some schools, you can argue because of their failure rates, their test scores, etc., they're failures. Just because some are certainly doesn't mean all are. And I would argue, and not just Parchment in Kalamazoo County, but I don't think there's a failing school in Kalamazoo County.
Well, you have hit on a central point, which is we always talk about, kind of reminds me of how people think their congressperson is good, but everybody else is as corrupt. And people, as I recall, and I don't know data on this, but seem to be fairly satisfied usually with their kids' school, but think that they're teaching meditation, seances, woo-woo, and nonsense. Now, but let's face it, isn't it demographics driven? We have Detroit Public here in Michigan, which has been an unmitigated disaster. But that's not where most of us live, and I don't mean we don't need to care about it.
But we continue to hear from the right that we should consolidate schools. So, my answer is, well, if bigger is better, then Detroit should be the greatest school system around, okay? Or New York, or Chicago, or Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, consolidation of schools, I believe that Climax Scotts, which is our smallest school district at just under 600 students, delivers a pretty darn good education, and the people who live there will back that play. But yet there are people in Portage or Kalamazoo that think we should consolidate that school system. Well, they didn't pay for that school.
When their latest numbers, I think show a fairly impressive delivery for what they're spending.
I agree. Okay. And again, the people who send their kids to school there, where the kid gets